If you see a cuneiform tablet for the first time, you're not likely to identify it as writing.
4,000 years ago, Sumerian astronomers recorded something in the night sky that has no explanation in any textbook. A second moon. Not a metaphor, not a god given the name of a moon, not a scribal error repeated across multiple tablets. A second object, hanging beside Earth's familiar moon, visible every night, tracked by professional observers across multiple cities for exactly 11 months. Then gone. The night it disappeared, the ancient records use a phrase that appears nowhere else in the Sumerian written corpus: the sky that wept fire. What the Sumerians saw, why multiple civilizations recorded the same event, and what the evidence suggests about how close it came to ending human civilization entirely, that is what this investigation is about. Because the tablet describing all of this exists. It has existed for 4,000 years, and what it contains has been sitting in a museum basement, largely unexamined, waiting for someone to take it seriously. To understand why the Sumerian record matters, you have to understand who was keeping it. The people who wrote these tablets were not priests composing mythology. They were not poets reaching for celestial metaphor. They were the world's first professional astronomers, trained, salaried, working in shifts from purpose-built observation towers that stood over 20 meters above their cities. The Sumerians called them the scribes of the heavens. Their work was precise by any standard. Their eclipse predictions compared to modern calculations are accurate within minutes. They tracked the orbital paths of every visible planet. They maintained continuous sky records stretching back centuries. When a Sumerian astronomical diary records something, it is recording an observation, the result of careful, systematic watching by people whose professional reputation and livelihood depended on accuracy. The city of Ur alone maintained 3 separate observation towers, each staffed continuously to ensure no gap in coverage. The scribes who worked them measured the sky the same way, using the same terminology across the entire network of Mesopotamian cities. When something appeared in the sky, multiple observers in multiple locations could confirm it, which is exactly what happened. The tablet catalogued as K8538 is an astronomical diary from the reign of King Amar-Sin. Its front face is standard: moon phases, planetary positions, the routine record-keeping of a professional sky watcher. Then the scribe turns the tablet over, and the language changes. The scribe introduces a term that appears nowhere else in the entire surviving cuneiform corpus: Namakur. Scholars have translated it different ways: the stranger moon, the foreign orb, the one that did not belong. What follows is not the controlled, formulaic prose of the professional recorder. It reads like a man making sure he gets everything right because he understands that what he is writing down has never been written before. No explanation has ever been offered. Before we continue, the evidence is real. The interpretation is yours. What do you think happened? Leave your theory in the comments. And if you're interested in mysteries that history never fully explained, subscribe and join us for the next investigation. The Namakur first appeared during the month of Abu, late July by our calendar. The scribe records its appearance 3 times in the same entry, as if he does not trust the first 2. He notes confirmations arriving from observers in nearby cities. He records the exact hour of its first visibility, the phase of the familiar moon at that moment, the stars near which it appeared. And then he begins describing what it looked like. It was smaller than Earth's moon, but brighter, not the pale silver of the familiar moon, but something warmer, more intense. The scribe uses a phrase that translates as the face of hammered copper, a reddish metallic color that immediately distinguished it from anything else in the night sky. It rose in the west, not the east. In a world where the movement of celestial bodies was understood with centuries of accumulated precision, this was profoundly wrong. The familiar moon rose in the east. Every planet the Sumerians tracked rose in the east. The sun rose in the east. The Namakur came over the western horizon, and it moved too quickly. Where the familiar moon completed its cycle in 29 days, the Namakur circled in 19. Night after night the scribes tracked it. Night after night it behaved like nothing they had ever recorded. Its brightness varied, brighter on some nights, dimmer on others, cycling through changes that did not correspond to the phases of the familiar moon. And then there were the shadows. The Sumerian record, and this detail is corroborated in sources from other cultures, mentions that on nights when both objects were high in the sky simultaneously, people and buildings cast two shadows, two separate shadows, pointing in slightly different directions. Imagine walking outside and seeing your shadow split in two on the ground beneath you. Imagine looking up and finding two moons looking back. The Sumerian scribes had seen everything the sky contained: comets, eclipses, planetary conjunctions rare enough to occur once in a generation. They had language for all of it, precise, established terminology that left no room for ambiguity. For the Namakur, they invented a new word. That is not what trained observers do when they see something familiar. The first question that should occur to anyone reading K8538 carefully is a simple one. Was this confirmed? Could it have been a single scribe making an error, recording a misidentified object, building a professional record around a mistake? The answer is no. Not because of the internal confirmations within the Sumerian network, though those exist and are significant, but because when researchers began cross-referencing K8538 against ancient texts from other civilizations in the same period, they found something that fundamentally changes the character of the mystery. The Sumerians were not alone. An Akkadian clay prism from the city of Kish, dated to the same year, describes what it calls two shepherds in the night sky, the familiar shepherd, their term for Earth's moon, and a younger shepherd who appeared suddenly and walked backwards across the stars. Walked backwards. In a culture where the movement of celestial bodies was tracked with professional precision, this phrase is not poetic. It is descriptive. The Akkadian text adds something the Sumerian tablet does not mention. It describes the younger shepherd as appearing to breathe, growing brighter as it approached in its orbit, dimmer as it receded, a pulsing, rhythmic variation in brightness that cycled with its movement. Egyptian astronomical texts from the same period described an object their priests called the Eye of Set. In Egyptian cosmology, Set was the god of chaos. The Eye of Set was not a welcome portent. The Egyptian records note the object was visible only during certain hours of the night, never during daylight, never near midday. And in a series of stone pillars excavated from a site in northern Syria, researchers found something carved that is not text at all, a diagram. Two orbital paths drawn around a central circle representing Earth, one path circular, marked with 29 notches, the other elliptical, marked with 19. Not art, a technical record built in stone by people who understood they were watching two separate objects following two separate paths. In China, in records that historians long classified as mythology, the bamboo annals describe a year of twin moons. The Chinese records included detail nobody expected. The stranger moon, they wrote, created double tides, rivers swelling and falling in rhythms that matched no known cycle. Multiple civilizations, no contact with each other, all recording the same event, the same year, the same behavior. The convergence is striking. And then you look more carefully at what each culture actually recorded, and you notice that the records do not entirely agree. The Sumerian and Akkadian accounts align closely, the same orbital direction, the same approximate period, the same copper color. But the Egyptian account of the Eye of Set contains details that do not map onto the Mesopotamian records. Where the Sumerian scribes documented the Namakur with consistent visibility on a predictable nightly schedule, the Egyptian priests described an object whose appearance was irregular. Some nights it was prominent, other nights the records suggest it was difficult to locate or absent from observation entirely. The Sumerians lived on the Euphrates and Tigris. Their records from this period say nothing about unusual river behavior. The Chinese, thousands of kilometers away, describe double tides. Place those two observations beside each other and hold them there. The Syrian stone diagram records 19 notches for the stranger moon's cycle. The Sumerian tablet records a 19-day orbit. These match. But the diagram's orbital path is more elliptical than the Sumerian measurements would predict, elongated in a way that suggests the object's distance from Earth varied more dramatically than the cuneiform record indicates. None of these discrepancies collapse the case. They are consistent with independent observations made from different latitudes, through different atmospheric conditions, by people using different methods and different conceptual frameworks. But they are also consistent with something else: the possibility that the records, placed by side, described not one object seen differently, but an event more complicated than any single account captures. The Sumerian tablet is the most detailed account of what came next. 11 months after the Namakur's first appearance, something began to change. The orbit that had been stable, predictable enough that the scribes could project the object's position hours in advance, began to shift, gradually at first, then faster. The scribes' entries become more frequent in this period. The professional detachment of the earlier observations gives way to something else, a precision that feels almost desperate, as if recording every measurement with perfect accuracy might somehow influence the outcome. There is something else buried in these later entries. The Namakur's 19-day orbital period, recorded consistently in the early months, appears to change in the records from the 9th and 10th months. The angular measurements, when compared against the object's expected position, show the Namakur arriving slightly earlier than predicted. The margin is small, but the Sumerian scribes were not producing imprecise work. Their earlier measurements are consistent and internally coherent. The scribe did not comment on the discrepancy. He kept measuring. Temple priests ordered special sacrifices. The king consulted with diviners. Ordinary people watched the western horizon every night for the object they had spent almost a year learning to recognize, and watched it grow larger. Whatever the Namakur was, it was falling. The night it ended has a name in the Sumerian record: the sky that wept fire. The scribe who recorded it was present, watching from his tower in when the sky changed. The object brightened, not gradually but suddenly, intensifying from its familiar copper glow to something that briefly approached the intensity of the sun. The scribe records that it illuminated the ground below his tower as if dawn had arrived in the middle of the night. Then it came apart. The single object became many. The Sumerian text describes 1,000 burning stones where there had been one, a cascade of light spreading across the sky as the Namakur fragmented in front of observers watching from cities across Mesopotamia. The fragments fell. Some burned out in the upper sky, streaking across the darkness like lines of fire. Others came lower before erupting in light the scribes described as brighter than anything they had words for. And some reached the ground. The Sumerian record accounts for 16 fires in Ur alone, fires that began where objects fell from above. The sound of impacts carried across the region, described in the tablet as something felt in the body before it reached the ears. The Euphrates, in certain sections, reportedly boiled. The Akkadian sources from the same period describe the death toll across southern Mesopotamia above 40,000. Archaeological excavations at Ur show a break in the material record at this moment. Buildings abandoned mid-construction, pottery workshops left with unfinished work still on the wheels, grain storage destroyed and not rebuilt. The administrative records from the years immediately following show a kingdom managing a crisis, populations displaced, irrigation damaged, the careful infrastructure of a sophisticated civilization suddenly and violently disrupted. The sky that had held the Namakur for 11 months was empty. What came after it was not recovery. It was survival. Beneath the Mesopotamian floodplain, in sediment that has been accumulating for 4,000 years, there is a layer, not wide enough to see with the naked eye, distinct when examined carefully, and datable. The sediment at this level contains microscopic glass beads, spherules that form only when rock is subjected to extreme sudden heat and pressure. The chemical signature is not consistent with volcanic activity, not a standard meteorite impact profile, something unusual. Seen from satellites using ground-penetrating radar, the landscape of Iraq and Syria contains circular formations that match the distribution pattern expected from material falling from a single source along a particular trajectory. Multiple formations, all small, some substantial, all dating to the same narrow window, all buried under millennia of accumulated soil, all invisible from the ground. The physical record does not tell us what the Namakur was, but it confirms that something came down, and it is here between the physical evidence and the explanation that evidence points toward that the ancient record introduces its most difficult detail. The Sumerian tablet describes the Namakur's final night in sequence, the brightening, the fragmentation, the cascade of burning stones. The Akkadian sources from the same event describe a different sequence, not dramatically different, but the order in which the two observer networks record the stages of the fragmentation, the initial brightening, the first visible separation of the object, the beginning of the debris cascade, does not align. Two professional observer networks, two sets of trained scribes, watching the same sky on the same night from cities 200 kilometers apart. The sequence of events they recorded does not match. Set that aside for a moment and consider what the best current explanation accounts for. Earth captures objects, not permanently, but temporarily. Small asteroids occasionally enter stable orbits, remain for months or years, then escape back into the solar system or meet some other fate. This has been directly observed. The mechanism that produces temporary moons is understood. The mechanism that ends them is also understood. Every object has a threshold, a distance from Earth at which the difference in gravitational pull between its near side and its far side exceeds the forces holding it together. Cross that threshold, and the object does not simply crack, it tears apart. The fragments that result follow roughly the same trajectory as the original, but spread as they enter the atmosphere, reaching the ground across a wide area rather than as a single impact. The pattern of destruction the Sumerian tablet describes is consistent with a fragmentation event of this kind. The behavior the ancient records document across 11 months, the retrograde movement, the 19-day orbit, the gradual orbital decay, The brightening in the final hours, the sudden fragmentation, is consistent with a rocky body of substantial size that entered Earth's gravitational influence, settled into a temporary orbit, and eventually crossed the threshold beyond which it could not hold together. The size implied by the ancient record is what researchers find most difficult to sit with. An object large enough to produce the fragmentation event the Sumerian tablet describes, impacting intact if its structure had held, would have released energy that no Bronze Age civilization and no modern one would have survived intact. Not just catastrophe for Mesopotamia, catastrophe for the planet. Agricultural collapse, multi-year atmospheric disruption, the end of the Bronze Age not as a historical transition, but as a biological event. The Namakur, fragmented. It came apart before it hit, by a margin that, in the scale of astronomical distances, amounts to almost nothing at all. The captured asteroid explanation accounts for most of what the ancient records describe. Most. The discrepancy between the Sumerian and Akkadian accounts of the final night has not been resolved. The anomaly in the late orbital measurements, the Namakur arriving at its measured positions earlier than its established period would predict, sits in the record without a complete explanation. The divergence between the Egyptian and Mesopotamian visibility patterns and the presence of tidal disruption in the Chinese records, but not the Mesopotamian ones, remains. None of these details overturn the explanation. Each of them suggests it may be working from incomplete information. The ancient observers were professionals. Their records do not agree in every detail, but the specific nature of the disagreement, particularly the sequence discrepancy in the accounts of the final night, is not the kind of divergence that distance and observational variation typically produce. It is the kind of divergence that suggests the two observer networks may have seen something slightly different. The scribe who survived that night ends his account with an observation, not a prayer. "The heavens are not empty," he writes. "The night sky keeps many secrets." In the Sumerian, the construction implies present tense, not kept secrets, keeps them now. He was not describing something that was finished. The Namakur appeared without warning. It maintained a presence in Earth's sky for 11 months. It fragmented in a cascade of fire that killed tens of thousands and disrupted one of the ancient world's most sophisticated civilizations. The physical evidence it left behind is recoverable if you know where to look. All of this is documented. What is not documented, what the ancient record raises without answering, is why the two most detailed surviving accounts of the event's final night record a different sequence of events. Two professional observer networks, same sky, same night, same training, different sequence. The Sumerian scribe recorded what he recorded. The Akkadian scribes recorded what they recorded. Both were professionals under extraordinary circumstances, and the records they produced, placed side by side, contain a discrepancy that the best current explanation has not yet fully addressed. This is a small mystery, in the way that the Namakur itself is a large one, small enough to dismiss. But the scribes who produced K8538 were accurate to within 2% of modern orbital calculations across 11 months of continuous observation. They were not making casual errors, and the Akkadian scribes who recorded a different sequence on the same night were working within the same professional tradition. One of them recorded something the other did not. The question that remains, the one the physical evidence cannot answer and the captured asteroid model has not yet addressed, is whether the Namakur in its final hours did something that neither observer network fully understood. The tablet sits in a museum, the sediment layer sits in the ground. The Akkadian prism sits in a collection most people have never heard of. And somewhere in the divergence between them, in the small, precise, professionally recorded disagreement between two ancient observers watching the same sky on the same night, the Namakur keeps its last secret.